So, how's your storm of the century going on? Ours isn't too bad. I mean, this is kind of normal. As a matter of fact, it's nice and toasty if you're prepared. You don't have to worry about your pipes freezing. You don't have to worry about your house getting colder than you'd like it to be. I've actually, since we got that truckload last weekend, I'm so happy it came in. I'll be bucking it up for the next couple of weeks. And I've got a bunch stacked outside. Maybe next time I'll show you how I've got it all stacked up so you get an idea how you can actually insulate your house even better. So if you don't have a log home, you can emulate a log home by doing what I do here, which is I stack up the wood like this, right? This actually will radiate heat into the room that it's collecting just from the air, but especially since it's right next to the stove. Have a wood cook stove that is made out of masonry stone, Rizzoli, and that one it's not even hooked up or set up right now, but it actually balances the heat inside the home, where it is doing the same thing that the wood here is doing, which is absorbing the heat, and then as the room begins to get cooler, it begins releasing that heat. That's the reason I'm going to be building a handcrafted log home on our property. For two reasons. And you live in Alaska, it's important to have a second dwelling in case something happens to the first dwelling, i.e. you get a stovepipe fire and your house burns down, which in contrast to the drama, it actually takes a lot depending on what kind of wood you're burning. Here, I always burn cured wood, and I always start off with a really hot fire where I get the temperatures right there at the edge of the red, and that basically burns up every part of creosote that might be in the pipe. And then you don't have to worry about things like that. And then, I don't know, God, every season I go and clean out my pipe. And most of the time there's nothing in there. And if you want to do it as a true clean, what we do up here often is we'll just fill up the whole stove with just cardboard and light that cardboard. And that cardboard will basically almost do the same thing as putting a brush through your stovepipe and cleaning out whatever creosote might be in there. But you shouldn't be building up that kind of creosote that much. If you're burning properly, starting your fires real hot in the morning or whenever you do it. So I do, in the winter, I do 2 fires. In the summer, not much, but in the fall and spring, I'll do 1 fire. But every time that I start the fire, I get it real hot. And what that does is it warms the inside of the house. So you'll get the house absorbing that heat, begin to be releasing that heat, the radiant heat, and then also you're just keeping, kind of like you're just keeping it afloat with the fire, which is like it is right now, which is low, and it's just warm red coals, and all that's doing is just keeping the temperature at a certain level, and it goes along like that. So that's a little quick intro if you're dealing with fires at your place, or maybe you've just bought a new stove. Things to be aware of. Oh, air intake. There's a laundry piping conduit that is the base of this Blaze King, and it goes all the way down through the garage below and goes out the wall of the garage, and it's above any place that could be water or snow running through. So it's about 5 inches above the dirt, the ground outside. And it's also got a grill system to keep anything like a mouse or anything from crawling in there. What's important about that is that we're not drawing air to burn the wood from inside the house. That does 2 things. It takes out the oxygen that you need to breathe. So that doesn't make it any good. But more importantly, you're defeating the purpose of warming your house, which is you're trying to keep the air that's in here warm. And if you're drawing air from the room, you're drawing air, even no matter how tight it might be, you're drawing the air from the outside, which is cold. So the only time I would do that is when I have the door open and I want air coming in just to keep this blazing and drawing a lot of oxygen in. And then once it's in, it's fired up, close it off, and then it's strictly pulling in air from below. And then I control it with the gauge control that's on the back. and that will enable the air to come in from the outside. There is no air being pulled in from within the room. Really important, because I noticed that because I'm on a number of homesteading and wood stove groups on Facebook, and I've been noticing a lot of questions that should have been answered at the shop, but weren't being answered at the shop. So a wood stove is a great way to heat your house. I've been trying to get friends up here in Alaska who are living in town, and so they've got local gas, natural gas, yeah. And when the power goes out, that's an issue. Same way that we also have a backup toyo. If you don't have it set up with a solar panel and battery array to keep that electricity going on that toyo stove will go out. And so then what would have been your backup stove is not a backup at all. And that's one of the reasons I just don't like to leave in the winter, because you don't want to leave in the winter and realize that all your pipes have been frozen, or because you thought that they would be okay because your backup stove was taking care of everything while you're away. Things to be aware of, especially as more and more people are dealing with the idea that the grid system is going to be crashing. But today's talk is going to be about the commies versus ICE, and they are commies. They are trying to make it look like they are fighting for First Amendment rights and Fourth Amendment rights and all this kind of stuff that they're saying that they're fighting for. They're not fighting for that. All they're doing is creating chaos. Whether they are aware of that or they're just flat out useful idiots. I think most of them are just flat out useful idiots. So this movement is attracting what people might think are the results of an MK Ultra program across the country. Which, the more you look at it, and all the psyops that have been put on people repeatedly, and people become more and more agitated for various reasons, and the tools that they've been using. Like, I just learned one about how they changed the music so that it would actually affect us in a malignant manner instead of a benign manner. And I'll talk about that later in another episode, which is wild to hear this woman, Dr. Sanger, talking about it, and then delving further into that. I think it was A and B on the music scale, and it was a 440 hertz, and how they had a conference and they disinvited anybody who might have been against changing it to 440, and they invited everybody who would be for it would be willing to vote for it being changed to 440. I think it's decibels. Is it decibels or megahertz? Yeah, I forget. And actually, that one actually causes aggression in people. And there's all this other stuff about how we've got music. Now, I've heard about stuff like how the music industry has been hijacked in terms of like pushing us towards rap and gangster and darker types of music as compared to what would be before, when people would listen to their music in order to relax, as compared to what's happening now is that people listen to music and they're getting agitated and getting more and agitated. So they're primed to go and attend these events where they're even crossing state lines to get there. But what we're talking about is actually control. And there's various things that are involved in this, which is, in order to control people, you have to... Okay, now we're going to start getting into a little bit of my background. So I have the background of being probably one of the few people who have been on both sides of the interrogation table. In Vietnam, I was on the side of the table you don't really want to be on when I was being interrogated. When I was in Central America and I was collecting defectors, I was on the other side of the interrogation table. In order to do this, you have to have a skill base in NLP, body language, hypnosis, basically good psychology skills. For me, it started, thank God, actually all the way back in high school. I had an instructor by the name, and if you read my book, The Bamboo Chest, that's all in there, I had a history teacher by the name of Al Stewart. Al Stewart, he's got to be long dead by now. Mainly because Al Stewart was a big, heavy-set guy. He always was a young thinker. He always thought like in a very modern, young thinking manner. But he was into hypnosis since he was a kid. And I think Milton Erickson would have been one of his mentors back from that time period in the way that he was talking. But Al Stewart, was an Army Ranger. And actually he got shot up really badly. I forget where they landed, but he was part of the D-Day invasion. And he just kept on going back and kept on going back. I've known a lot of these guys in my life over the years from different wars who just keep on, they keep on taking this lead and copper and they just keep on coming back. So Al is one of these guys. But he noticed that I was having issues in high school, mainly because I'm what's called a third culture kid. That's someone who is of one nationality being raised in another nation, in another culture. And so that's called, it was called, I forget I think she was a sociologist or maybe a psychologist, who would define it as a third culture, which means that sometimes we have issues with dealing with certain cultures that we're actually from, like being an American. What's it like to be an American if you don't really realize or you've not experienced living as an American in America? You lived overseas. One of the examples is that culturally, overseas, we're about 5 to 10 years later, slower than what was happening in the United States, like in music. So it's like, if it's the 70s, a lot of us were listening to music from the late 60s, right? Except when you'd have new people coming out from the States, like to Singapore and Vietnam and everything, and they would bring the latest music. Or, well, in Vietnam, not as much of a shift because the GIs were there and they were always having the latest music, right? So Al noticed that I was having issues dealing with just my classmates, and it's just like how to coordinate, connect. And he says, hey, you know what? Let me get you set up. And he got me set up with self-hypnosis. And it kind of helped, right? But I'll tell you where it did help. And where it helped was when I was in prison in Vietnam. So everybody was amazed with how squared away I came off on the plane. I had reporters just, we're going to talk about fame. I'm going to talk to you about fame, like global fame, where everybody knows who you are. And then the kind of fame that we have now, which is like, if you're in a podcast, you know Joe Rogan, you know Sean Ryan, you know blah, 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 okay? So that's within a community. So now you have fame within community. But I want to show you the difference between the two and how people relate to it. But when I came back and they were interviewing me, they were talking about the idea that like, wow, man, you're just so, we would have thought you would have just lost your mind over there. And the reason I didn't lose my mind, in contrast to the other guy who did lose his mind, this was a guy, so I was 18, got out when I was 19. The other guy, Richard Knight, the one who was actually the one who had planned and set up this whole operation to go in after treasure on an island off the west coast of Vietnam that I was using in order to get in and try to find out what was happening to the American MIAs. And the reason I knew about it was because this idiot, wild. So he contacts CIA for maps. They send them to him. You can do this too, under FOIA. Sends him a bunch of maps. He's got these maps and it's stamped CIA right on top. Declassified. And he's got these maps and he made a trip. He did not tell me this. I did not know this. Because if I had known this, it would have been clear to me what this guy was really all about. Which is, I found out later when I'm in prison and we are sharing a cell for a moment. Because most of the time we're in solitary. And he's telling me that he had actually gone to Vietnam before we went in. And he was trying to do an investigative trip to see if we could actually get to the island that we had gotten to on his own. But at that time, you weren't allowed to go to any part of that area along the Cambodian border, right? But he had these maps from the CIA in his luggage, and they were confiscated by customs when he came into Vietnam. And guess where they showed up again? I have no idea about this. He, on the other hand, says, oh, well, you can order them. You can. And I was just getting them because it seemed to be like the most accurate types of maps, blah, 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 blah. So that begins the whole idea of you're a spy for the CIA. And, okay. And so he lost his mind because he wasn't doing his work. I was doing my work. And that's what the book's about. It's about healing my memories of having lived in Vietnam during the war as a kid from 68 to 72. Starting with the first memories of the Tet Offensive and then going on until we left in 72. And hypnosis, self-hypnosis, was a very important part of it. And the way I was using it in prison was to turn 11 months into 11 hours. So I would do a self-hypnosis where there's this clock and it's an 11. Each one is a clock and I'm going through that clock and I'm going through the hours on the clock. I'm not going through months, right? So instead of 11 months, it was only 11 hours. So I'm not even there for a day, psychologically, emotionally, and subconsciously, right? And your subconscious is where this all works. It's also your subconscious is where all this stuff comes out. And I'm going to be talking about that because that's where all this stuff is happening right now. And the way they've been attacking you is through all the media, all the paid operators who are doing this, and then the useful idiots that I'll be talking. And I'll give you a list of who I think are the useful idiots and how they're inciting and getting you all ramped up. And the more you watch this information, David Icke is very accurate in this. I kind of wish the last one that I saw, he was talking about how you fundamentally change a society, the best way to do it. And the thing is, if you fundamentally change a society, you can never go back. This was theory in 1908 when the Carnegie Endowment asked a bunch of scientists to brief them on how you could basically change society. And they said the basic way you can do that is with war. Okay? David Icke was talking about this, but he doesn't give credit to the person who actually investigated this. The one who investigated this in the Reese Committee is Norman Dodd. This guy.
The year 1908, which was the year that the Carnegie began operations. And in that year, the trustees, meeting for the first time, raised a specific question, which they discussed throughout the balance of the year in a very learned fashion. And the question is there any means known more effective than war, assuming you wish to alter the life of an entire people? And they conclude that no more effective means than war to that end is known to humanity. So then in 1909 they raised the second question and discussed it, namely, how do we involve the United States in a war? Well, I doubt at that time if there was any subject more removed from the thinking of most of the people of this country than its involvement in a war. There were intermittent shows in the Balkans, but I doubt very much if many people even knew where the Balkans was. Then finally, they answer that question as follows. We must control the State Department.
Let's give some credit to this guy. It's kind of like when I hear Tucker Carlson talking to these people and he's talking, quote, about this conspiracy and that conspiracy, and I have yet to see Edward G. Griffin on there. Why is that? You should be asking these questions if you're like in adoration of Tucker Carlson. Why has nobody invited Griffin on to talk? I mean, I can imagine he's older, but shoot, hook him up. Tucker gets him on the phone, gets a bunch of people on Zoom calls. You know, hopefully I can freaking get Griffin on. He's the same age as he's the same age or a couple years younger than my dad was in terms of birth. My dad's gone since 2012, so that shows you how great shape Griffin's in. So they have fundamentally been changing our society repeatedly, not letting us go back to what we were before. It's kind of like once you've seen the elephant, it's hard to unsee the elephant, right? That's what we used to say in combat. It's like once you've seen the elephant, You can't unsee it. On one level, that's how you look at a real combat veteran who's seen the elephant. You know how we act, you know how we react. We don't have we're not a big question. That's why the newbie, the new guy, the NG, the Chichaco, we call them up here. You don't know how they're going to react. They might react exemplary and everything's smooth and groovy and everything's cool. The other ones, they might go running in and freaking get shot in the back of the head. Who knows? But what's happening is we've got this ramping up of chaos, and we've got some major players who are playing this. So what's been happening overseas is happening here now.
Piece of land
so all these color revolutions have been happening for the last 20 years. And actually, it goes even further. It goes all the way back to Henry Temple, Lord Palmerston. Lord Palmerston. He was known as the gunboat minister or the gunboat prime minister. This guy is the one that is credited with having come up with color revolutions. And the reason he was doing this is the reason you would do a color revolution. You go to other countries and you create chaos by creating all these different, so color revolution, it's the color of the flag. So you get a bunch of flags flying and you get all these flags killing each other. So while they're doing that, you can then take control of everything. Remember what I said? Those who get their shit together take over, and the other ones who don't get their shit together, they get taken under. That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Keep a cool head. This is the reason I'm telling you. You need to start thinking like a combat veteran. You need to think like someone who's going into combat, is at peace with what's going to happen, and when what needs to be happening is there, you will do what you need to do in order to achieve your victory and get the hell out of there and survive. That's how this works. People can't be losing their minds. They can't be bouncing off walls. They can't be showing up at events they shouldn't be showing up at. If you've got 4 kids and you're a mother, be a mother and stay home and take care of your kids. That's it. Right? If you are a nurse and you want to provide aid, then stand back to the side, stay out of the way, and if somebody does get hit, then provide service. You don't get into the melee. You don't get into the melee. And that's what happens. People are getting into the melee because they're attracted. Once you get into a chaotic mindset, you're then attracted to like attracts like attracts like. When you have chaos and you have a chaotic mindset, it comes together. All the psychology comes together. That's what's happening in this country. They've been ramping it up for the last 30 years. That's why those of us who have lived here long enough, we're like, what the hell is happening in this world right now? I just called up a buddy of mine and he's got a cabin on the far side of Kodiak. The only way you can get in is by a long boat ride or a pretty long beaver float plane ride. And I'm telling you, I was telling him, man, I need to get out of here because where I'm in the country of the wilds of Alaska. And I'm still not far enough away to get away from this. I'm at a point right now, it's like, get on an island in the tropics, no TV, no cell phones, no internet, no radio. All I'm going to hear is the lapping of the beach, at the beach, by the water, and that's it. And you're going to find out more and more people who are sane are going to be reaching for that. And hopefully you can attain that before you get overtaken by this madness that's occurring. And it's again, a color revolution. It's being set upon. The players are people who are supposedly protecting us because they're supposed to be the government. The government's only role, according to the Constitution, is to protect the citizens and the land and the borders of the land. That's it. And that's exactly what they're not doing. As a matter of fact, it seems like they're doing the opposite, especially in Minnesota. So Waltz and all his cronies, and especially this Rachel Sayer. Let's check out her history right here. Yeah. This is a woman who basically was running the Color Revolution program in all these different countries and US aid. USAID is not the kind of USAID that I remember when I was a kid. Because my dad, when he was doing the initial projects for Philco Ford was a contractor working under USAID. USAID, at that point, was helping and assisting in improving rice production in Thailand, Vietnam. My dad, because of his background in technology and communications, was helping build radio communication stations on tall mountains all around Vietnam, so you could communicate on all levels. Is that suspicious? Yeah, especially when we know about radio communications now and how radio waves can be used to modify the masses. If you can get people to do things because they feel uncomfortable, remember, okay, let me give you a little bit of like hypnosis and NLP and state change. One of the ways in order to get somebody to do something is to create a state change. They're doing it in various ways. One is that you create a state of being uncomfortable. Another one is you create a state of euphoria. It's kind of like, let's say I capture a prisoner in the field because I'm a field interrogator, and I give a kid some chocolate, or tease some freaking lieutenant or some captain in their freaking guerrilla FMLN, and I give them cigarettes. Have a smoke, try and relax, trying to help, right? So initially, the government's coming in and say, hey, we're here to help you, and we're trying to protect you, and this is all about, your safety. And they're stealing your rights, but then they start shifting you, and they start saying, hey, they're stealing your constitutional rights by the things they're doing, which is interesting. They're all worried about your constitutional rights and your First Amendment and your Fourth Amendment as long as it's towards their favor of keeping illegal immigrants who are raping and attacking American citizens and living off the system and stealing money like the Somalis and sending them in billions out to Somalia to fund warlords in Somalia. That's your tax dollars. So it's okay for, in that manner, they're there to help you, and they're trying to keep you in their control, under their leadership, while they are basically doing Marxist actions to get you with this. And they feed off the emotional irrationality of the human animal. When you look at us as no different from any other animal, let's say a dog, and we know about how you can get certain reactions, like a dog will salivate when it hears a bell because it's conditioned. And if somebody sees an ICE label and says, oh my God, it's a bunch of Nazis, when all they're trying to do is come in and do what they're tasked with legally, which is to remove illegal. They're not even illegal they're not immigrants. They're just illegal invaders. And they did not come here in order to do what prior immigrants, like our ancestors, or even somebody's ancestor who may have even illegally come on here from Mexico to go and work in California or whatever. At least they were coming to work and do something and better their lives. The ones that came because they got there's a variety of ones that came. Some are flat out operators who are funded by the Chinese, who are Chinese, to get here to infiltrate into this country. And has anybody thought about all their kids that they might be giving birth to in the United States? So that if you do that, you change the demographics? This is what we're talking about. When I had a question today, what is it with this trying to thin out the white race? Why would you do that? Why would you thin out an ethnicity? Shoot, we could be an African and do the same things. Why would they be thinning out the ethnicity of the African American black? I mean the black African. Why? Why would you do that? You would do that because you are breaking down an identity. For instance, to someone say, I am an American. Remember, I was saying that previously. I'm an American of Scottish ancestry, German ancestry, Swiss ancestry. These are Caucasian. But they're culturally from specific cultures. And I have very strong understandings of what those cultures. I also have a very strong understanding of what my culture is as an American, as an individual inside this identity, this melting pot identity. There is a collective. But the thing about it is, they've shifted. And I'm going to read this part to you because this is from the Norman Dodd. I will put a link so that you can download your own copy. But this is the thing of how they have basically done this in order to, okay, so for example, here's a quote from the Norman Dodd report from 1954, September 10th, 1954. The American, and I'm sorry, previously I had said that the AHA was created in 1938. It wasn't created in 1938. It began being funded heavily by the Carnegie Endowment in 1934 is when they really started ramping this up. But it was actually created in 1889. But then it got hijacked, and that's what they do. They see something that works, and then they hijack it. It's kind of like TPUSA. Some people say, did it actually start off with all the Zionist money coming into it because they knew who they could hit and get them pro-Israel until Charlie Kirk got assassinated because he started to see what was really happening? Same thing. They look at what's working and they try to buy their way in, and that's what they did with the AHA. And here was the effect. The American Historical Association was established in 1889 to promote historical studies. It is interesting to note that after giving careful consideration in 1926 to the social sciences, a report was published under its auspices in 1934, which concluded that the day of the, and was actually underlined, which concluded that the day of the individual in the United States had come to an end and that the future would be characterized inevitably by some form of collectivism and an increase in the authority of the state. So you have your education system being hijacked where you as an individual matter not at all, and you only matter as part of the collective. Does this start to bring in ideas about these folks? Yeah, I don't want anything to do with it. But we've already been set on this course. And you see this, and this is the manner in which people are doing this. And it says, what concluded the day of the individual in the United States had come to an end, and that the future would be characterized inevitably by some form of collectivism and an increase in the authority of the state. So up until 1934, there was a strong understanding the government was not supposed to be above you, that is supposed to be under you, and you're supposed to be telling it what to do and not what it is doing to us now. And then people say, oh, well then, okay, then you should be totally against ICE. This is the problem, and this is what these people have been banking on. They are using our own Constitution against us. And it sucks. And the way they were able to do that, and this is what everybody was warning about, is to not allow this invasion to occur that occurred under the last Biden administration, which was actually, as we're starting to find out, since the signatures went to Obama and not from Biden, that he actually just had his third term under Biden and carried out what he was trying to do previously, which is to bring an influx of cultures into this country. Remember, it's bringing people from other cultures who have been raised under other governments who have no retraining to understand how our government is supposed to work and are supposed to be allowed to illegally vote in this country, because that was the whole objective. That's the reason they don't want voter ID. So now they're causing an issue because they say, well, you can't be asking for people's IDs, because if you ask for people's IDs, that's unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. They play this game, and that's what sucks. And that's what I'm trying to tell you. You need to be preparing in the way that I prepared, which is this republic has seen its better days. Just like somebody who remembers what they were like in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And is now in their 70s and 80s. We're in our 80s, maybe 90s right now. We're seeing the effects We're seeing the irrational decisions coming out of our administration, mainly because they don't know how to deal with this. I mean, how do you deal with the death? I mean, think about it. There you are, you're trying to provide aid. I did. To your dad who's dying or is dead, and you're trying to revive your dad. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? That's where we're at right now. And it's been done by diluting our identity to make us not have an identity as Americans, because the new collectivism is that, oh no, we were just like a group of people together. Not recognizing the idea that we used to be individuals and we used to have backgrounds that we came from ancestrally. And with that, we brought our cultures that actually kept us unified. Here's one for you. I'm an 8th generation American under the Graham line, under the bottom line, because there was arrival on Plymouth Rock, then there was movement on the bottom line, actually up into Canada, and then back in the United States. So total North American on that side. And that's an identity. So on that line, under the Graham line, that my grandmother, who was the German Swiss, was the first Scots-Irish, in term culturally, to be married into the Graham line. My Graham line, since the arrival of the Grahams, the last arrival of that family connection in 1774. So think about that. There was cultural identities of what that meant, in the same way that you have Germans who came in the 1860s, along with the Irish during the potato famine, and then the following cultures that came to this country. That's why you had Italian communities. That's what made San Francisco so great, and that's what was destroyed during Silicon Valley. All these old Italian families where you could afford to raise a family in North Beach in San Francisco up until Silicon Valley came in. Silicon Valley was the beginning of the end of not only California, but also the United States. Why? And actually, it might even be the downfall of the world. If Palantir and all these freaking idiots, we're going to talk about Revenge of the Nerds. People think, oh, it's so great. I remember. So there was actually an article, I think it was called Revenge of the Nerds. It was all about Bill Gates when he was starting to make all this money and everybody was getting on Microsoft. This is in the early 80s. And video games. Video games are so great. I remember that when Reagan actually told everybody, this is going to be great for the military. We're going to have all these kids, they're going to be jet pilots even before they get to school, because they're going to have the dexterity because they've been playing all these video games. And I looked at that going, oh my God, I even knew that back then in the 80s, that something is amiss here. I don't know what it is, but I think everybody's going to find out. And here we are, we have people who are so disconnected from the real world that they are willing to actually have us become cyborgs. And then everything that you were terrified of and freaked out about, like in The Matrix and all these horror flicks in books like 1984 and Brave New World. What do you think that was all about? Why did we have all these books and movies coming out? Was it because it was just like fantasy and all kind of stuff? Or were the ones who were writing these books warning us? Or, and this is even more insidious, they were making it okay. Think about that. It's kind of like, well, we talk about drugs, and we'll talk about all perversity that's in this country right now, that things are being made acceptable. And I bet you even the idea that, here's a transgender guy that freaking got shot up a bunch of times, who had issues evidently because he has to dress up in order to be a whole man. Okay. There is a devolution in our society. There's been an attack on our psychology. And most people are not prepared for it. And the only way you can prepare for it is to have a connection to your culture. And this is the reason that the Muslims have actually had such great strides in this country and in the West. Why? Because the cabal, and man, I used to think it was just like, oh, it's the Rothschilds and the Illuminati. I'm going to put a flowchart together and we'll show you who's playing on us. You've got the Club of Rome. Club of Rome was actually where the idea of thinning us out. Those are the people who started coming out with the global warming crap. When before we were actually worried about, like in the 70s, they hadn't come out with it yet. In the early 70s, it was global cooling. We were worried about the ice age. I'm looking outside right now for us in Alaska. But my friends in Texas and Tennessee are having these ice storms. Yeah, it seems more like what they were talking about in the 70s before it got hijacked by people like Gore, who was just a whore, paid off by the Club of Rome. I think it was an Orsini. We'll talk about the Orsini family. Oh yeah, ciao bella. These psychos, man. What happens when you put psychos and money together? You get what's happening now. Damn. So the reason you're having this disrespect of Caucasians and moving away of Caucasians, and you shouldn't, it's bad to be white. The reason is because white is so striking, right? But black is so striking too. But black doesn't have the same kind of cultural leadership in the United States that white did. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. I'm sorry, there weren't any black people who wrote the Constitution. And back in Africa, the idea of free states, maybe Shaka Zulu, maybe his tribe had independence in that little tribe, but it was tribe. We got to a point where a nation had ideas put together. And see, that's the thing. It actually goes back, like if you heard the talk with E.M. Burlingame, and he always goes off. He's always going off about all the time. I appreciate it, but sometimes I gotta say, man, I'm Scottish. Also. Not just English, not just German, but there is an identity of freedom. Freeman. Spelled F-R-I-E-M-A-N. Freeman. Or freedman would be a freed man as compared to a free man. There's an identity of being free and independent. And that's where the origins come into our own Constitution. And they actually came through in the Magna Carta and even into Alpha-Stein. Yeah, we're talking about like way back in the origins of Wales and the Germanics, because the Vikings come in, the Teutonics, the Picts, and then the Celts coming in from Ireland. But there's this idea of freedom that they don't want to have, and it's associated with, quote, being Caucasian. Once you can break that cultural connection, that it actually spread down when people started taking it on and said, no, I'm a free man. Here in the Americas, the tribes, the Oglala, it was the human being, which is free. You had to fight for your freedom against other tribes, but you had freedom within your tribe if you were part of that tribe. But again, you also have hierarchy between male and female. Something to think about. Everybody idolizes any type of culture over one or the other. But the thing about it is, if you have a culture, you have an identity. If you don't have a culture and you don't have an identity, you look for one. We're predisposed to fit in with a tribe. What's happening is, because of the marketing, just like with the color revolutions overseas in Egypt, Syria, Libya. Oh, the same places that Sarah, what's her name? Sayer. Places that she was the USAID head. Yeah. / deep state. Yeah. So who's now in the emergency services department for Minnesota? So the wolf has been let into the hen house. And most people wouldn't even know that in Minnesota. But they just follow along because, hey, they're looking out for us, right? Instead of, no, they're basically trying to run you like operators you haven't even know. Your assets, your agents of the commies, and the commies are the agents. This is the thing. Okay, we'll make a little quick jump over to Israel. So people say, oh, so you think what, the Jews are in control? You think the Zionists are in control? You think Israel's in control? No, they're the foot soldiers. They're the centurions of the Rothschilds. That's why the Rothschilds created it. That's why they remember, something's going somewhere. They're going to fund it. Marxism, they're going to fund it. Zionism, they're going to fund it. They fund it, and now it's beholding to them. Just like TPUSA, beholding to them. Where's the money coming from, right? So the Zionists then take that money and then they redistribute it into the countries like the United States and Argentina and Colombia and definitely Mexico. I mean, who's the presidente of Mexico right now? Think about that. But the people that you see are never the people who are truly in control. They're the front men. It's just like the Bushes. How did the Bushes become so wealthy? It's because George H.W. Bush's grandfather, forget his name, maybe he was another George Sr., I forget. But he was the one who was the front man for the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers wanted to keep on making money off of Adolf Hitler. They loved Adolf Hitler. He made things work. So they wanted to keep on funding him and making profit off of him. But you couldn't do that because then you'd be considered a traitor. So they didn't want to go to prison and they didn't want to have their name blacklisted. So they went to George H.W. Bush's father and said, hey, we'll make you a lot of money. You just have to be the front guy. And so he was the front guy. So imagine being raised in a family like that, where you know that your father was doing the dealing with the Nazis, who was the direct enemy of the United States, and then the son goes and flies bombers, light bombers, in the Pacific and gets shot down in the Navy. All these games being played. And the game being played right now in Minnesota is just a continuation. It's actually the result of the lack of identity that Americans are arriving at because they're not looking at themselves as individuals who have their own personal identity that goes all the way back to wherever they came from and fit culturally within that. It's been destroyed. The collectivism has been replacing it, and that's what we're talking about in the Dodd report. And I'll give you a link again to be able to get a copy of this. This is what you got to watch out for. This is what's happening here. It's wild how this is occurring. Don't go to these things. You're going to get into trouble, and you're going to be just another stupid pawn who's being played by these people. You're not fighting for anything. If anything, you're aiding in the destruction of the United States. These people who are illegally here should not be allowed to vote. They will be allowed to vote if there's no ID required in the voting ballots. Not that that really matters because now our leadership is being placed. That's why I'm telling you. You don't want to be living in cities. Cities are, where is all this happening in? It's not happening in the country. If I didn't have internet, if I didn't have radio, if I didn't have TV, I would not know about it. All I would know about are moose walking on my property, eagles flying across the sky, bush planes flying up to drop people in the field. That's all. That's a very peaceful place to be. That's an anchor. You need to find your happy place, like I did in prison in Vietnam. I had no control over myself in prison, right? I had to do the interrogations. I had to participate in their interrogations. I had to give them answers to their questions, or else. And I had no idea when I was getting out. And that's a big question we're going to find out is how long before we get out of this matrix? Because we're already in the matrix. It's not the idea they're pushing into the matrix. We are already in it. You got to get clear that we're already in it. And how are we going to take over the matrix so that it's not feeding the evildoers in this matrix, in this world? And that opportunity has not come up yet. The idea of like going and fighting ICE, who are rightfully taking illegals out of this country. Yeah. And I'm going to show you one of these who, he knows he did wrong. I'm going to get that interview. I'll play it for you. And you can listen to this Mong. He knows he did wrong. But he's being used as an example. Oh, this is what could happen. Yeah, this is what could happen to you if you're being irresponsible. Things are just flipping all over. This is part of the chaos. This is planned. This is in order to create instability for them to move pieces around. You can't move pieces around if they're entrenched and localized, right? If you have your own farm and you're feeding yourself, are you going to leave and just go off to war? No. I mean, remember, that was one of the things that was one of the biggest problems in the Civil War of Secession, is to get people to leave their farms and go off to fight some war against the Yankees and vice versa against the Confederates. Great movie to watch, Shenandoah. It's free on YouTube. I watched it. It's a sad story. It's with Jimmy Stewart, and it's about how his family basically just got raped by the events of the 1860s, while he was trying to just keep stability within his own family on his own land. That's what's happening around. All the chaos is happening, and your best interest is to just avoid it until you can't avoid it. And by that time, hopefully, there will be a clear view of where to go. Because right now, we're just having chaos. We're having Boston Massacre events. Go review what happened in the Boston Massacre. It was just a bunch of people just went off. And that was actually horrible. That was a situation where they just flat out didn't care. And pay attention. When they start bringing in people from outside, well, that's what they're kind of doing with ICE, right? Bringing people willing to go and enforce the law. But when they start bringing people from outside, and we've talked about that with blue helmets, and we're going to see if that's even going to be viable anymore. Because if the UN, another part of this thinning out the culture is the replacement migration that the UN's been running. And that's what all these illegals are here for. They're here, quote, to help with the aging population because the kids aren't having kids anymore. So who's going to take care of the work for the aging population, right? That was the excuse that the UN was giving to Europe. So, you got to bring in all these Africans in. Not taking into account that actually by bringing in all the Africans, those Africans were going to thin the culture out and make it have no identity. They're not going to be Africans anymore because they're not in Africa. And there's no such thing as African. There are, what? How many tribes in Africa? Tribal. That's why there's so much killing in Africa. Because there's so many. You can put a boundary around an area and say, this is Nigeria, and this is Lagos, and this is, the Ivory Coast. The Ivory Coast. Doesn't mean anything. It's all tribal. That's where the culture comes from. Culturally, we had European cultures arrive in the United States, or what became the United States. And that created the identity, the initial identity of what the country is. And then it changed and changed and changed. But when it gets to a point where it gets so diluted that what you started with was a beautiful glass of wine, right? This beautiful glass of wine. But then you kept on pouring water, and you kept on pouring water, and kept on pouring water. Finally, you just have water, and you have no idea why you're even holding this glass that you thought you were going to sell as a beautiful glass of wine, but in actuality, it's just a glass of water now. That's what's happened to the United States. We've been so diluted that the ideas that created this country. Remember, the wealth and success of this country came about not because of the wealth and success. The wealth and success came about because of the ideas of the government and the culture that's created the Constitution. That, when they say it was a bold experiment, an amazing experiment, it was. And hopefully we can take it back and regain it again, but we don't have it right now. That's the reason we're having all this stuff. That's the reason that we have, basically, do you know who Trump is? Trump is Caesar. He is Julius Caesar. I tell people over and over, a raven just flew by. Pretty cool. I have a lot of ravens right now. Trump is Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon not because he says, I'm going into Rome. He was asked to come into Rome. The citizens were pleading for him to come into Rome. And guess what happened when he came in? He says, well, now I'm the emperor. Because this is the only way I'm going to get anything done. So if you're trying to understand what's happening in this country, we are Rome. I keep on telling people, there is no difference in history. History is a rehash. It's an over and over. It's the bell curve. It comes up, it goes back down. It comes up, it goes back down. If you flip it around, it becomes a circle. It's a circle. History just keeps on coming around in a circle. And that's where we're at right now. We had true blue blood Romans, right? And then they started intermarrying with all these different tribes that they've conquered. They intermarried with the Teutonics. That's where the blondes started coming into Italy, what is now Italy. That's why you have northern blondes in the north. They're being brought in. They're being intermarried. They're being brought down. Wow, blondes are pretty attractive. Brought in. And then that changes the culture. The original culture that created Rome. Rome actually was a democracy. Remus and Romulus, right? It's small enough to be a democracy. Then he kept on expanding and expanding. Then we want to keep this type of democratic. We are not a democracy. We are a democratic republic. And so that's what they became because it got too big. They needed representation because each one of us could not go and represent ourselves in the Senate, right? In the government. And so then they created the Senate. And then you got the republic. And then it got even bigger. And then it got to a point where it was just feeding off itself because the worst thing that happens is government becomes too big. Then they plead for someone to pull them out because they can't pull themselves out because they forget what it was like to be first a democracy and then to be a democratic republic. And then that automatically just leads you down the road into an empire. And that's where we arrived at. And it wasn't even an empire that we were in total control of because the city of London controls this empire. So in the same way that the Israelis were the direct foot soldiers for the Rothschilds, we became the big giant empire army for the city of London. That's how wild this has occurred. Because if it was all to us, don't you think we would have, as citizens, benefited much more greatly than we did over the last 100 years? Yeah. So think about that. That's what they're doing. That's the reason you don't want to get into this mess. Best way to stay out of getting shot in the head for stupid reasons is to not show up in places where stupid people get shot in the head. And they're getting shot and they're getting run over because they're doing things that they think they're doing. And in actuality, they're just being pawns of people like Waltz and Sayer and all these color revolution maestros and orchestrators. It's a color revolution occurring in Minnesota. And they're doing this because they have the bed has been set. It's already been played and prepared. They've prepared the bed and now they're just plotting and running everything and just running their operators one after the other, one after the other. And most of them don't even know that their operator is being played. They think they're fighting for the First Amendment. They're fighting for the Fourth Amendment. They're fighting for citizens' rights. Well, that's interesting because the people who are supposed to be picked up and leaving aren't citizens. Ask yourself that. When things don't add up, what is happening? Chaos is what the objective is. David Icke talks greatly about it. But we're having a war going on. And this war is a civil war. And the Civil War is not starting. It's been going on for quite a few years already. It's just that now it's starting to rise in volume. And the question is, where are you going to be in this? Are you going to actively be part of this? And are you clear about what's going to be on the other side? Because right now, we have forgotten who we were because we've been diluted culturally and genetically. And we don't have representation because our representation feeds into the oligarchs who paid for their campaigns. And we're in a situation where how do you take back your country without losing it through your fingers? It's kind of like that situation. You pick up a scoop of water, and then if you squeeze too hard, all that water goes through your hands, goes through your fingers. How can you keep it while the whole world is shaking and not lose it and not hold it? Questions to think about. Most important is just not be a pawn. Don't get sucked up into being a pawn. Remember who you are. Remember who your family is. Remember where you come from. Remember all the people who have sacrificed in order for the ideals of what this country is supposed to stand for. And don't let that be hijacked by operators who know how to play into that and create color revolutions to disenfranchise you further from what could actually be regained. But it's not going to be regained by being a commie. Don't be a commie. It didn't work in other countries. It's not going to work in this country. Socialism and communism are the two sides of the same coin. And again, remember, divide and conquer. But they play them. And they just try to get everybody to be on one side or the other. And then they try to get the government and the Americans to get involved in this. This cultural revolution is going to get even worse because they're seeing how effective it's been, because this has been prepped by what I described in the Dodd report and the Reese Committee report about how they hijacked the education system in the mid-1930s and have brought it up to where we are right now. This is nothing that just popped out of nowhere. They've been doing this repeatedly in order to completely take over. And you're having this reset. The question is, are they going to finalize what they've been trying to do, which originally they were trying to make us during the 1930s more socialists under FDR so that we would be more able to meld in with the Soviet Union at the time and create this new world order. Well, I guess they weren't banking on the idea that the Soviet Union as a government structure and system can't support itself, and that's why it collapsed. So now they're trying to do something else. What are they trying to do? It's the same people, not specifically genetically, unless they live for hundreds and hundreds of years. Some people are saying things, I don't know. David Icke especially. But once you get a movement going and it picks up, I mean, look at Christianity. That's a movement. It came. Buddhism. These are all movements. They're belief systems. They become religions. Once they're a religion, communism is a religion. That's my whole saying. I said, Islam is a government, is a political front, and communism is a religion. Think about that. How are those played out? On that note, stay focused. Take a breather. There's a lot of stuff coming this week. I've talked a little bit about it. When you get a color revolution going, it has to burn out. The question is, how does it burn out? Does it fizzle out? Or does it become a raging fire? And you'll find out. Let's see what happens. Hopefully the press is not going to be suicidal, because the press has people in it, and it's people, and they're Americans. And if they're trying to protect America, they won't try to do any AI crap and try to inflame the population to the point that we full-on have just full-on chaos. Because if it goes now, you're going to have a type of revolution which has got no idea of where to go. It has no intention. That's the reason it's not really picked up. Have you noticed that? There's no real intention. That's actually the reason that the American Revolution, the Civil War, the first Civil War, actually the only Civil War well, until the one that's happening right now. But the Civil War against the British, that's what the American Revolution, to the world, it was the revolution. But actually, it's a civil war. It was a civil war against the British government, against the monarchy. That had identity only because of what was put in the documentation. Until then, we were floundering all over the place and losing because nobody could define what we were and what we were going to be. I don't see that. Now, beware if what happens is it's a communist front that gets, like I said, they get their shit together first. And they define what this revolution is going to be, and people jump in behind it under a socialistic or a communist. Remember, same side, two sides of one coin. If we get under that coin, those are the coins you put over your eyes. On that note, have a good evening.